The year is 1953. The world has just stepped into the dawn of a new year. World War II, 8 years ago, came to an end with the capitulation of the German Reich. The Cold War is now in full swing. But, as this year would show, there are much larger things we should be worried about than nuclear annihilation.
Off the coast of Iceland, a monster was being born. Seen by some as something not to be concerned about, it would soon shake the foundations of recovering nations. What this storm would bring is a disaster seen like no other at the time. The Dutch would come to know it as the Watersnoodramp. In the UK, it would be known as the North Sea Flood. In this two-part documentary, I hope to cover the two most affected countries by the storm and floods. Both were wrecked by it, but both have taken two very different approaches to preventing this disaster from ever happening again. Welcome to part 2. Last time we spoke about how such a hazardous storm came into creation and what made this storm particularly dangerous. We also spoke about the UK's side of the story. In this episode though, I hope to cover the Netherlands side of the disaster. What was its effects and what was its impact in its aftermath, as well as how it has prepared for the future.
The Netherlands. It's not something we'd associate with flooding today, is it? With its impressive array of waterways, dikes, dams, delta networks, their war with the sea has led them so far to actually start reclaiming land from it. Probably the most famous of this is Flevoland in central Netherlands. Now, I spoke to some Dutch students about flooding in the Netherlands, and this is what they had to say.
Ja, ik denk zelf niet heel erg veel na over het risico overstroming. Ik denk wel dat het een groot risico is in Nederland, omdat Nederland voor het grootste gedeelte wel onder water ligt en daardoor te groot risico is. Maar in mijn dagelijks leven denk ik er niet zo heel erg veel over na, omdat er ook gewoon heel veel andere mensen zijn die daarover nadenken. Dus dan hoef ik dat niet te doen.
Nou, ik ben niet bang dat ik last ga krijgen van een overstroming. Omdat er goede voorzieningen zijn in Nederland, zoals dijken. En omdat ik in het midden van Nederland woon.
Ja, nou ik maak me eigenlijk vrij weinig zorgen om. Ik weet gewoon dat de kans bestaat, maar als het gebeurt dan zijn we allemaal dood.
Ik denk zelf niet aan overstromingen. Ik denk er wel eens over na, maar waar ik woon denk ik niet dat ik ermee te maken krijg. Maar ik heb natuurlijk wel gezien afgelopen zomer, als ik het goed zeg, bij de IJssel in Deventer, dat de kans op overstromingen waren door het hoge waterstand. Ik heb daar vorig jaar wel meer ingezien dat het mogelijk is, omdat het water zo ontzettend hoog stond. Maar ik denk dat wij als Nederland, mocht het gebeuren dat het echt gaat overstromen, dat wij goed zijn voorbereid door de dijken en door de maatregelen die de veiligheidsregio's nemen op dat moment. Dus ik denk dat wij daar wel heel goed op voorbereid zijn en dat ze daar heel goed op handelen, zoals afgelopen zomer in Deventer bijvoorbeeld langs de IJssel.
As you can see, this is nothing that they're worried about. But this wasn't always the case.
The Netherlands leading up to 1953 was a country that had been ravaged by war. Cities such as Den Haag, Rotterdam, Arnhem and Groningen had been completely levelled. In the years after the war, funds had been redirected from several projects to aid in reconstruction efforts. To give an idea of how bad it was, some buildings in Arnhem wouldn't be repaired until the 1970s. This diversion of funds would leave the country vulnerable. Vulnerabilities that would only become visible in 1953. By January 29th, a storm, the likes of which Northern Europe hadn't seen for decades, had formed off the coast of Iceland. Over the next couple of days, the storm travelled southward and tore its way through the east and the southeast coast of the United Kingdom. It would make landfall on the west coast of the Netherlands on the evening of January the 31st. The storm first arrived in Zeeland on the southeast coast of the Netherlands, hitting its peak around 10 p.m. It would arrive along the coast later at IJmuiden at 1 a.m. and in Helder at 4 a.m. Like the UK, the high spring tide coupled with the large amounts of low pressure and extremely high gale force winds created monstrous waves. At Hoek van Holland, the water reached an average height of 3.85 metres. The highest was recorded at Vlissingen at 3:15, where the waves were recorded at 4.5 metres tall.
The dikes and storm defences weren't originally designed to deal with waves of this size. Something was going to give. and unfortunately something did give. But it wouldn't be until the morning of the 1st of February that the true extent of the damage would be shown.
Dikes and storm defences had been broken in more than 150 places in the areas of Zeeland, South Holland and North Brabant. Tons of water had flooded and rushed inland, damaging and destroying anything in their path. Nobody was prepared for this. People were fast asleep and woke to pure chaos, being completely inundated by water. The flood would cost the lives of 1,836 people, 864 in Zeeland, 677 in South Holland, and 247 from North Brabant, with others coming in from the surrounding areas. In the following days, 72,000 people will be evacuated. 150,000 hectares of land had been flooded, requiring vast amounts of effort to pump out the water. Not only that, but the land had to be desalinized due to the large volumes of salt left behind, making the land useless for farming. 47,000 cattle and 140,000 poultry had drowned. This destroyed livelihoods and businesses. Infrastructure was in ruins. Many roads and railways were completely inundated by water. This left some communities isolated and stranded. Power lines had been brought down, leaving large areas without electricity. Roughly 4,300 homes were destroyed, and another 43,000 buildings were damaged. This left some people homeless and with nowhere to go to seek refuge. In total, the damage would cost the Netherlands 1.3 billion guilders. That's 5.4 billion euros today. Immediately in the wake of this disaster, relief efforts were made. Money, goods and clothing arrived en masse from all over the world. Organisations such as the Red Cross played a key role in helping with the distribution of these goods. It became very common on Dutch radio to hear fundraising programs that ran under the motto Beurzen open, dijken dicht. Stock exchanges open, dikes closed. The Director General of the Rijkswaterstaat, Ministry of Public Works and Water Management, declared a national emergency and founded the Dike Repair Coordination Bureau. Thousands of workers and more than 4,000 soldiers from the Netherlands came to repair the dikes. This was a massive and incredibly labour-intensive job. But the job also attracted many labourers from across the globe who came and travelled to help repair the dikes. The day after the storm, the dikes were set on immediately. Sandbags were used to fill in the holes until they could be reinforced. But sadly, not only did they have to contend with the 150 gaps that had appeared, but upon closer inspection, smaller flood holes were discovered. These amassed to roughly over 500. Large concrete blocks, though, were soon moved in. In some cases, the gaps were so big that they sunk ships in the gaps to try and stop the breaches, such as Bath in Zeeland. But by the 6th of November 1953, the last hole in the dikes was closed in Alverkerk in Zeeland. It had taken 3/4 of a year after the disaster had occurred to complete repairs. After the disaster, the Dutch government assembled. 60% of the Netherlands can flood easily, and large areas of the country also sit below sea level. It was clear more than ever how important it was to protect themselves from flooding. Unanimously, all agreed nothing like this could happen again. The Dutch were going to go to war with the sea, and they would win no matter what.
Over the following days, months and even years, the government would introduce stricter safety standards on flood defences. An example of that is having flood barriers be a required minimum height, in accordance with the Delta Act. But this wasn't one of the most famous intervention strategies.
The Delta Works. This massive feat of engineering started in 1954 and was only completed in 1997. This was a series of dams and dikes built in Zeeland and across areas of the Netherlands to protect from flooding and storms. Like this, the Oosterscheldekering, the Eastern Scheldt Storm Surge Barrier. This massive structure connects Noord-Beveland and Schouwen-Develand. It's 9 kilometres long and was constructed with an artificial island to allow work on the dam system. The total construction cost came to roughly 2.5 billion euros at a yearly cost of 17 million euros. Or this, the Maaslandkering. Based outside of Rotterdam, this was completed in 1997. This massive storm gate costed a whopping 450 million euros. That's 738 million today. This storm defence holds the record for the flood barrier with the largest moving parts. Each gate is an incredible 210 metres wide, 22 metres high and 15 metres deep. Interestingly as well, it works off an artificial system, so that when the water level is predicted to rise over 2.9 metres, the defence will automatically close the gate. But it wasn't just hard engineering that made the Delta works. There was a lot of soft engineering and especially innovative new ideas. The Sandmotor, based off Hoek van Holland and Scheveningen, is just that, a bit of genius engineering. Here, 21.5 million cubic metres of sand were dumped in a strategic location. Why is that important? Well, the usual idea is that you place sand along the coast, it forms a beach, the waves crash against the beach and not the buildings. But the problem is, over time, the tide, currents and wind can destroy that beach, making it useless. But here in the Netherlands, because of where they placed it, the tide, currents and wind help to build it. Not only does that mean over time the protection of the coast will increase, but it's also created new habitats for wildlife and the public to enjoy. To cover all of this, the Watermanagementcentrum Nederland, or the Water Management Centre of the Netherlands, were set up. Their job is to help coordinate with regional and national levels, with water management, help defend against water-related hazards and storms, and projects related with water in the Netherlands. They operate on a 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Now, this is all extremely impressive, but it still leaves questions to be asked. Has the Netherlands become too at peace with its current situation? With climate change making a greater and greater impact on the world, are these defence systems up to the task of dealing with a more extreme and chaotic world? They've proved themselves ready for the battle for today, but what about tomorrow? 26% of the Netherlands population is situated below sea level, and 60% of the country is easily flooded. So these aren't questions to be laughed at, because as history has shown us, it has a nasty habit of repeating itself.